The town didn't change overnight. It happened quietly. One missing report at a time. One discovery that didn't make sense. Santa Cruz had spent the late 60s wrapped in a kind of innocence. A beach town. A surf town. A place retirees came to disappear into the sound of the ocean. Then the university arrived, and with it youth, freedom, people searching for something looser, something truer. By the early 70s, that freedom had become a magnet. Young people drifted in from across the country, hitchhiking, living communally, trusting strangers. And someone was watching. In 1972, the illusion shattered. Pieces of bodies began appearing. Not whole victims, fragments. Sometimes in the mountains, sometimes carried in by the tide. The question rippled through Santa Cruz like a sickness. What was happening to our town? Police were drowning in missing persons reports. Young women, college students, girls who vanished between one ride and the next. It became clear this wasn't random. Someone was hunting co-eds who hitchhiked alone. 18-year-old Anita Lucchesa disappeared first. Later, her severed head was found in the mountains. No body, just the skull. Then Marianne Pesci vanished. A gifted skier, 18 years old. Soon after, 15-year-old Aiko Ku, a ballet dancer, gone. Each case deepened the confusion. Different ages, different locations. No clear pattern investigators could grab onto. Then Cindy Shaw disappeared, 18 years old, babysitting to put herself through college. By then, fear had settled in. Every new report carried the same unspoken dread. This one might end the same way. The press gave the killer a name, the co-ed butcher. It was meant to define the threat, but it only made it feel larger, more faceless. Police began pulling underage hitchhikers off the roads, not to punish them but to keep them alive. The backlash was immediate. Accusations of violating freedom, of overreach. But officers knew the truth. This wasn't about rights anymore. It was about survival. The killings didn't stop. Rosalind Thorpe vanished from the Santa Cruz campus, 23 years old. Then Allison Liu, 21, never found. Each disappearance added another weight to investigators' shoulders. They had no suspect, no motive, no direction. Indiscriminate murder is the hardest kind to solve. No personal connection, no obvious trigger. Some wondered if drugs were involved, if the counterculture itself had turned violent. But the truth was far colder. In April of 1973, the case shifted, not through a tip, not through evidence, but through paperwork. A routine firearms record crossed a desk. Detective Michael Alufi noticed something unusual. The buyer's criminal history had been expunged, but not perfectly. Through the blacked-out lines, Alufi could still see it. A murder in Madera County years earlier. The name attached to the record was Edmund Kemper, 25 years old, 6'9", nearly 300 pounds. Around town, everyone called him Big Ed. Kemper wasn't some drifter. He wasn't a hippie. He wasn't hiding on the fringes. He drank with cops, talked with them, laughed with them. At a local bar called the Jury Room, Big Ed was practically furniture. He was friendly, charming, a good listener. No one thought of him as dangerous. When the question came up, who would go take the gun away? No one volunteered. Kemper was massive and armed. The task fell to the junior detective. There was apprehension, a big man, a big weapon, and one officer knocking on his door. At the time, Kemper wasn't even remotely connected to the co-ed killings. He lived quietly with his mother on what appeared to be a peaceful suburban street. But when detectives arrived, they couldn't find the house. Multiple residences shared the same address. Nothing was clear. Then a car rounded the curve and pulled to a stop nearby. Detective Alufi decided to ask for directions. As he approached, he noticed the man inside the vehicle lying across the front seat, the door open, hands working beneath the dashboard. Alufi stepped closer, and just as he was about to speak, the man looked up. The man straightened up from the car, and when he stood, there was no mistaking who he was. He rose over the detective, towering, massive, unmistakable. Even at 6 feet tall, Alufi found himself looking up. This was Edmund Kemper. Alufi explained the purpose of the visit. There was a question about the firearm purchase. They needed to temporarily take possession of the weapon to confirm whether he was legally authorized to have it. Kemper didn't resist. He didn't argue. He calmly walked to the trunk. As he reached for his keys, something instinctive kicked in. Training. Experience. A sense that things could change in a second. The detectives separated without speaking. One moved to one side of the trunk, the other to the opposite. Both hands hovered near their weapons. The trunk opened. Inside, there was almost nothing. No liner, no clutter, just a single bundle wrapped in what looked like a blanket or towel. Kemper reached toward it. Alufi stopped him. He stepped in, reached into the trunk himself, and lifted the bundle out. Inside was the handgun. Nothing else. The empty trunk registered as odd, bare metal. No lining, but there was no reason at the time to dwell on it. The gun was confiscated, paperwork completed, and the detectives left. For Alufi, the moment passed. He filed the weapon at the station and moved on. 2 weeks later, at 5 o'clock in the morning, everything came crashing back. Officer Jim Connor was working the night shift when he overheard a colleague taking a phone call. It was from the gun owner, from Edmund Kemper. Connor recognized the voice immediately. Something was wrong. Kemper was calling from a phone booth in Pueblo, Colorado. He sounded exhausted, disoriented, like he hadn't slept in days. Then he said it. He told Connor he had done something terrible. He said he had killed his mother and one of her friends. Their bodies were still at the house. Then Kemper asked a strange question. Did Connor know Detective Alufi? He explained that the house was hard to find, but Alufi would know the way, because he'd already been there. Officers contacted Alufi at home. As the details came through, he felt the blood drain from his body. The realization hit all at once. Deputies forced entry through the back of the house, breaking a window near the sliding glass door. They moved carefully inside. Searching. In a closet, they pulled back a sheet. Hair. Blood. Confirmation. And then came the words no one was prepared to hear. Kemper had told Connor something else on the phone. He said he had killed all of the co-eds too. He was taken into custody without resistance. And there finally the truth surfaced. Edmund Kemper didn't deny it. He confessed to everything. He would later explain that Santa Cruz had been living beside a monster, one who blended in effortlessly, a man trusted by police, a man they drank with. At just 24 years old, Kemper claimed responsibility for 10 murders. The co-ed butcher had been standing in plain sight. Now in custody, he began to tell his story. And it didn't start in Santa Cruz. Edmund Kemper was born in 1948, the middle child of 3. His childhood was rigid, unforgiving. Both parents were strict disciplinarians. There was no room for warmth, no room for error. He admired his father, but his relationship with his mother, Clarnell, was something else entirely. She was harsh, aggressive, relentlessly demeaning. Her words cut deep. In 1957, the marriage ended. 9-year-old Edmund moved away with his mother and sisters. By then, something in him was already off. He mutilated his sisters' dolls, cut off their heads, twisted their bodies. At 10 years old, he made a chilling remark that if he ever had to kiss his teacher, he would have to kill her. Violent fantasies were taking root early. They didn't stay imaginary. He moved from dolls to animals. He later admitted to burying a cat alive, then digging it up again. Behavior the FBI would later recognize as a warning sign. A fractured home, an absent father, a cold, hostile mother. Violence rehearsed in fantasy long before it was acted out. As Kemper grew, he became bigger, stronger, and stranger. His mother began locking him in the basement at night. She feared he might sexually assault his sisters, so she confined him. A cot, a sleeping bag, a single bare bulb dangling from the ceiling. Rats scratching in the darkness. Fear, isolation, resentment, all fermenting together. As a teenager, Kemper fled. He went to Los Angeles, hoping to live with the father he idolized. But he was rejected, turned away. Instead, he was sent to live with his paternal grandparents on a remote farm. And there, away from supervision, away from help, the fantasies finally crossed a line. His grandmother reminded him too much of his mother, authoritarian, controlling. One day, while his grandfather was out, Edmund Kemper picked up a .22 caliber rifle, and for the first time he acted on the violence inside him. When he realized his grandfather would soon return home and discover his wife dead, Kemper claimed he made a decision. He later said he couldn't allow his grandfather, an elderly man, to experience that kind of trauma. So when his grandfather walked through the door, Kemper shot and killed him. It was a justification that stunned even seasoned investigators. A logic so warped it barely resembled compassion at all. 2 people were dead, and Kemper was still a teenager. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and sent to a Atascadero State Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility. The environment there was overwhelming. Hundreds of violent offenders. Very little staff. Very little control. Doctors later acknowledged the imbalance. More than 1,000 patients, dozens of murderers, hundreds of sexually violent offenders, and only a handful of psychologists. Kemper wasn't just another patient. He stood out. He was intelligent, articulate, cooperative. He followed rules, answered questions smoothly. To staff, he appeared compliant, even reliable. Before long, Kemper was trusted. He became an assistant to the psychological team, working with files, records, evaluations from some of the most disturbed offenders in the system. He was 15 years old, and he was absorbing everything. He read detailed descriptions of sexual crimes, methods of manipulation, techniques of deception. This wasn't treatment. It was instruction. At the same time, his inner world intensified. His violent fantasies didn't fade. They evolved. Sex entered the picture, not as intimacy, but as control. Doctors later explained it clearly. This wasn't about connection. It was about using people as objects, doing something to them, not with them. Kemper admitted he spent hours each day locked inside his fantasies. Obsessive, repetitive, unchecked. He also learned how to game the system. He studied psychological testing, learned the language clinicians wanted to hear, knew how to shape his answers. Eventually, they believed him. After 5 years at Atascadero, Edmund Kemper was released. He was 20 years old, 6'9" tall. Doctors recommended one critical condition, that he not live with his mother. That warning was ignored. He moved back in with her. The relationship that had shaped his rage was now his daily reality again. Socially, Kemper was isolated. He struggled around women, felt inadequate, lonely. A young man in his early 20s with no dating history, no normal way to connect, and a past he could never explain. The pressure built, and eventually it found an outlet. Kemper later told investigators that's when he began picking up co-eds. At first just rides, practice runs. He drove all over California, learning, watching, refining his approach. He presented himself as harmless, friendly, safe. Each trip brought him closer to acting out the fantasies he'd rehearsed for years. In custody, Kemper didn't hold back. He talked, endlessly. He walked detectives through his crimes with disturbing clarity. Some killers stay silent. Kemper wanted the spotlight. He explained how carefully he planned, how patient he was, how long he waited until he felt fully in control. Then he described the day it began. On May 7, 1972, Kemper picked up two 18-year-old friends near the Berkeley campus. Marianne Pesci, Anita Lucchesa. They trusted him enough to get in the car. He drove off calmly, and within minutes, the trap was already set. Kemper told detectives that once the girls were in the car, the manipulation began almost immediately. He would casually suggest that a door wasn't closed properly, and because of his size, because he could reach across the entire vehicle, he'd lean over, adjusted himself, and quietly sabotage the mechanism. A small object dropped into place, invisible, effective. If fear set in, if they tried to escape, the door wouldn't open. He drove them to a remote location. There, at gunpoint, he forced Anita into the trunk. Then he returned to the front seat. Marianne never made it out. For Anita, trapped in darkness, there was nothing she could do but listen. The sounds, the fear, the realization that something irreversible was happening. Kemper opened the trunk, and there he ended her life. He transported both bodies to an apartment he was renting. What happened next, he described without hesitation, methodical, detached. He dismembered them, and later scattered their remains in the mountains. While Santa Cruz reeled, while fear tightened its grip on the community, Edmund Kemper did something almost unthinkable. He went for drinks. At the jury room, he sat shoulder to shoulder with police officers, laughing, listening, blending in. He was there often, friendly, familiar. To the men around him, he was just Big Ed. But in his own mind, there was another layer. Here he was, an active killer, accepted completely, invisible. For men like Kemper, police proximity wasn't accidental. It was stimulating. It gave him access, information, control. He could hear how the investigation was unfolding, or not unfolding. Names discussed, body parts mentioned casually, speculation traded over drinks. And still, no one suspected him. On September 14, 1972, Kemper spotted another hitchhiker, 15-year-old Aiko Ku. She had missed her bus. She was worried about being late to dance class. She held up a sign, trusting the road. She was young, small, easy to overpower. She got into Kemper's car. He drove across the bay toward San Francisco and then kept going. By the time she realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Kemper later admitted that only after bringing victims' bodies home did he feel fully in control, away from witnesses, away from interruption, where fantasies he'd nurtured for years could finally be acted out. To him, his victims weren't people anymore. They were objects, symbols of power, possession, total dominance. To avoid detection, he separated body parts and disposed of them in different locations. One of those places, just minutes from the home of the detective working the case. Years later, that realization would haunt him. The knowledge that the predator had been so close, that families were living ordinary lives while danger sat quietly in the mountains above them. Kemper would later kill 3 more young women: Rosalind Thorpe, Allison Liu, and Cindy Shaw. Cindy was 18, a college student, a babysitter, someone trusted. She cared for the children of Officer Jim Connor, the same man Kemper would one day call. After killing Cindy, Kemper took her body back to his mother's apartment. In his mind, there was something different about her. He felt a connection, an attachment. He kept part of her with him, and later, he buried it in the backyard beneath his bedroom window, facing inward, always close. To those who knew him, the revelation was impossible to reconcile. Big Ed had seemed gentle, soft-spoken, almost shy. The idea that he could be responsible for such cruelty felt unreal. By early 1973, Edmund Kemper had killed 6 young women without drawing suspicion. But the visit from Detective Alufi, the gun confiscation, changed something. In Kemper's mind, it felt like a game. Cat and mouse. He became convinced the police knew, and he feared only one thing more than arrest: that his mother would find out, that she would be humiliated. For years he had fantasized about one final act, the one person who had shaped his rage. In the early hours of a spring morning in March 1973, Edmund Kemper got out of bed. He took a hammer, and he walked into his mother's bedroom. The crime he had imagined since childhood was finally about to happen. Kemper's mother became the final focus of everything he'd carried for decades. What he did to her went beyond the murders that came before. It was personal, furious, unrestrained. After killing her, he decapitated her. He screamed at her face. He hurled insults he said he'd been swallowing since childhood. In his mind, this was confrontation at last. He even tried to destroy the one thing he believed had hurt him the most, her voice. To him, those vocal cords represented years of belittlement, control, and rage. But it wasn't over. Kemper knew his mother's best friend would soon grow concerned, so he invited her over. She never left the house alive. After that, Kemper fled. He drove for days. No sleep, no destination. And then finally he called the police. When detectives arrived at the apartment, nothing looked disturbed. It appeared as though someone had simply gone away. Only after lifting the mattress did the truth reveal itself. Blood, soaked deep, and a note, an apology of sorts, a message left for the police, something no investigator there had ever seen before. Both bodies had been hidden carefully, placed inside closets. Organized, deliberate. In October of 1973, Edmund Kemper stood trial. The courtroom searched for answers. How could someone so cooperative, so soft-spoken be responsible for such devastation? Those who spent time with him described a contradiction. A gentle giant, until he wasn't. During psychological testing, the mask slipped. In an instant, rage erupted, raw, explosive, uncontrollable. And just as quickly, it was gone. In court, Kemper's recorded confessions were played aloud. Families listened. Parents heard, in his own voice, what had happened to their daughters. It was unbearable, because beyond the headlines and the nickname, there were lives. Young women with futures, dreams, choices that would never be made. On November 8th, Edmund Kemper was found guilty of 8 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. The question lingered: why? Was it his childhood? The environment? The mother he despised? Or something deeper? Some called him a sociopath. Others pointed to trauma, to biology, to circumstance. Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it fully explains what he became. Years later, a package arrived at the home of a psychiatrist who had known Kemper as a teenager. Inside was a handmade cup, carefully crafted. On it, a message, an apology. Those who studied Kemper believed there was a part of him that wanted to be normal, a part that understood the horror of what he'd done. But understanding doesn't undo damage. And remorse doesn't bring anyone back. Edmund Kemper would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The co-ed butcher, a man who walked freely among his hunters until the truth finally caught up with him. And Santa Cruz would never forget how close the monster really was. If this case held your attention, support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. It helps keep these stories coming. Thank you for watching.